Ahoy there, speculative pirates, Pastafarians, and ye seekers of sacred carbohydrates. Welcome aboard. I be Captain Dread Pyrate Higgs, humble host for the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster of British Columbia, and licensed purveyor of spiritual marinara. If you be new here, this be a Pastafarian sermon served up weekly, devoted to the praise and glory of our Lowly Lord, wherein we explore life, spirituality, philosophy, and other matters of importance, such as whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza. And for the record, no toppings are forbidden by the monster. So don your colanders and tricorns with pride, fill your goblets with grog, arm yourselves with the instruments of consumption, and let the spiritual feasting begin. Ahoy, me mates, fellow Pastafarians, and all ye who have ever looked into a mirror and wondered whether the person looking back is actually you. There is a peculiar little lie most of us tell. It isn't usually malicious. It isn't even entirely dishonest. It sounds like this: that's just who I am. Or, I didn't really have a choice. It's what other people expect of me. That's just the way things are. And, well, sometimes those things are true. We do not choose every circumstance into which we are thrown. We don't choose where we're born, what religion or culture we're ensconced in, what happens to us as children, what opportunities we're denied due to factors we may be unaware of, what illnesses find us, or what other people decide to do that affects us. But somewhere between the things we cannot choose and the things we can, there is a strange little territory where human beings become remarkably talented smugglers. We sneak our choices across the border and disguise them as inevitabilities. I have to stay in this job. I have to pretend I believe this. I can't admit I was wrong. People like me don't do things like that. I've always been this way. And perhaps the most dangerous, what difference would it make anyway? That last one sounds like skepticism. It isn't. Skepticism asks, how do I know? Cynicism has already decided nothing matters. And somewhere in all of this lies a rather uncomfortable possibility. The greatest lies we believe are often the ones we tell ourselves. So today, me hearties, I propose we perform a small Pastafarian ritual. Let us take up the Sacred Colander, but instead of placing it reverently upon our heads, let's turn the bloody thing around and, for a few minutes, strain our own excuses through it. Amen. Consider how many different people you have already been today. Perhaps you were a spouse, a parent, an employee, a customer, a neighbor, a believer, a skeptic. Perhaps on particularly fortunate Fridays, even a pirate. There is nothing dishonest about any of these roles. Human beings need them. They help us understand our relationships with one another and navigate the strange social arrangement we call civilization. The trouble begins when we forget they are roles. There is a subtle difference between saying, I work as a cook, and saying, I'm a cook. This is just what cooks do. Between, I belong to this religion, and people in my religion aren't allowed to think that. Between, I have believed this for 30 years, and therefore I must continue believing it. We take something we have chosen, or something we have once stumbled into, and quietly transform it into something inevitable. The role becomes the excuse, and the excuse becomes a cage. Sometimes it's a comfortable cage. There may be a pension in the cage. There may be friends in the cage. There may be applause in the cage. There may even be a rather fetching tricorn hat. But comfort doesn't make the bars disappear. And here is where things become unpleasant. Because if the cage door is actually unlocked, then we can no longer blame the cage for our staying inside. We have to confront the possibility that we're choosing to stay. A French philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre had a term for this peculiar human talent. He called it bad faith. But bad faith is a little more complicated than simply lying to ourselves. Sartre saw human existence as caught between two things. He called them facticity and transcendence. Facticity is what is already true about us, our past, our bodies, our circumstances. The choices we've already made and the consequences that followed. We cannot simply wish these things away. Transcendence is our capacity to reach beyond what already is, to imagine possibilities, and to choose what we might yet do or become. And bad faith can work in either directions. We can pretend we are nothing more than our circumstances. This is simply who I am, I cannot change. Or we can pretend our circumstances mean nothing. My past doesn't matter. My responsibilities don't matter. I can simply decide to be somebody else. Both are evasions. We are neither objects completely determined by what has happened to us, nor disembodied spirits capable of becoming anything merely because we wish it. We are the peculiar creatures caught between the two. And perhaps that is why freedom can be frightening, because freedom comes with an irritating companion, responsibility. If I convince myself that I couldn't possibly have done otherwise, I don't have to examine my choices. If I convince myself that what I've already done doesn't matter, I don't have to reckon with the consequences. Bad faith gives us an escape route in either direction. And perhaps this is why authenticity is so much harder than simply being yourself. Because sometimes the self you're being is precisely the thing you need to question. Which presents us with another problem. Somewhere along the way, authenticity acquired a rather peculiar meaning. We are told to find yourself, discover the real you, be true to who you really are. Wonderful advice, except who exactly is that? We often talk about the real self as though it were a finished version of us buried somewhere underneath all the expectations, compromises, mistakes, and accumulated debris of life. As though if we could scrape enough of it away, eventually we'd uncover the genuine article. There you'd be, the authentic you, probably looking considerably younger and wondering what took you so long. But Sartre offers us a much more unsettling possibility. Perhaps there isn't a finished self waiting to be discovered. Perhaps you are still making one. This is part of what Sartre meant with the phrase, existence precedes essence. First, you are here. Then you become. Sartre illustrated the idea with manufactured things. A knife is made for a purpose. Before it ever exists, somebody has already decided what it is supposed to be. A human being, Sartre argued, doesn't arrive with quite the same instruction manual. We find ourselves here, alive, conscious, surrounded by circumstances we didn't necessarily choose, and through what we do, we participate in answering the question, who am I going to be? Not once, repeatedly. And that's what makes authenticity considerably more demanding than declaring, this is the real me. Because sometimes the real me is impatient, Sometimes the real me is selfish. Sometimes the real me is frightened. And sometimes the real me has been carrying the same opinion around for 20 years because admitting we were wrong would be embarrassing. Authenticity cannot simply mean obeying every impulse that happens to emerge from inside us. Nor can it mean discovering some hidden personality and surrendering ourselves to it. Indeed, Sartre himself leaves us with a difficulty here. If we declare that we have finally discovered exactly what we really are, we risk constructing yet another fixed essence, another cage. So, perhaps the better question isn't, am I being true to myself? Perhaps it is this the self I am choosing to become? But there is another complication. We are not becoming ourselves alone. We are surrounded by other people. And other people have opinions. This, as history has repeatedly demonstrated, can be troublesome. Other people see us. They judge us. They remember things about us that we would occasionally prefer to be misplaced. To one person, you are reliable. To another, difficult. To another, funny. To another, foolish. To someone who knew you 20 years ago, you may still be the person you stopped being 19 years ago. And here, Sartre noticed something deeply unsettling. The moment another person looks at me, I become something in their world. I experience myself not only as the one who sees, but as something that can be seen. Sartre called this the look, or the gaze. And we have all felt it. You walk into a room feeling perfectly ordinary and suddenly notice someone staring at you. So, how am I standing? What am I wearing? Do I look ridiculous? Did I just say something stupid? For a moment, I encounter something about myself I cannot completely control. The person I am in somebody else's eyes. And this is important. It isn't simply that they have invented some false version of me while I possess the genuine article. Their experience of me is real too. I genuinely am something in their world. But I am not exhausted by it. The danger comes when their judgment becomes my definition. The good son, the difficult woman, the successful businessman, the failure, the believer, the atheist, the old man, the outsider, the respectable citizen, the religious nut wearing a colander. We reduce complicated human beings to nouns. Failure, saint, bigot, victim, perhaps even Pastafarian. The moment we do that, we perform a tiny act of theology. We declare, in essence, this is what you are. And the danger begins when they start believing in our God, or when they start believing in theirs. This is the philosophical territory behind one of Sartre's most famous lines. Hell is other people. The line actually comes from his play, No Exit, but the problem runs through his philosophy. He wasn't simply saying that people are dreadful, although anyone who has spent 20 minutes reading the comment section beneath any podcast on the internet might reasonably consider the hypothesis. The deeper problem is that other people possess something about us that we can never completely possess ourselves, the person we are in their eyes. But the answer cannot be ignore everyone. I don't care what anybody thinks of me. Can become a costume just as easily as respectability can. Other people sometimes see things about us that we cannot. They correct us, challenge us, love us. Occasionally, they tell us uncomfortable truths. The harder task is learning to distinguish between being seen and being defined. Other people may judge what we do. Sometimes they will even be right. But neither they nor we get to pretend that one judgment finishes the human being. And this is perhaps where Sartre and I must begin to part company. Not because he has failed to show us something important, quite the opposite. He has brought us to the edge of a rather frightening freedom. Sartre famously said that we are condemned to be free. And we should understand why he chose the word condemned. For Sartre, there is no divine author who created us according to a predetermined human blueprint. We did not choose to exist, yet here we are. And once here, we must choose. We cannot escape responsibility by appealing to some predetermined essence that tells us what we were made to be. This is Sartre's existentialism. But hear me, hearties, standing at the Pastafarian pulpit beneath the benevolent gaze of the flying spaghetti monster, I wonder whether we might take that insight somewhere where Sartre himself would not. Perhaps we are not condemned to be free. Perhaps we are invited to be free. There is a difference. Condemnation says you must. Invitation says you may. And perhaps that difference matters. Because ours is a strange faith. Our monster does not thunder commandments from the heavens. He offers, I'd really rather you didn't. He does not demand that questions cease. If anything, he seems rather suspicious of anyone claiming to possess all the answers. Our scriptures contain contradictions, jokes, absurdities, and pirates. And rather than hiding these things, we put a colander in our heads and carry on. Perhaps there is something genuinely sacred in that, because Pastafarianism does not require certainty as the price of belonging. It leaves room for doubt. It leaves room for laughter. It leaves room for being wrong. And, therefore, it leaves room for becoming. So I don't think that authenticity means discovering some hidden, perfect version of ourselves. Perhaps it means participating honestly in our own becoming while refusing to lie about either side of our existence. To acknowledge what is true about us without pretending it is all we can ever be. To acknowledge our freedom without pretending that freedom erases our circumstances or responsibilities. To say, this is what I believe today, but I will still listen. This is what I have done, and I am responsible for it, but it need not determine everything I do next. This is the role I occupy, but it is not the entirety of what I am. This is what others think of me, and I should listen, but they do not get the final word. And perhaps most importantly, this is what I think I know, but I might be wrong. That last sentence may be one of the most liberating prayers ever uttered. I might be wrong. Not, nothing is true. Not, nothing matters. Not the lazy refuge of cynicism. Quite the opposite. I care deeply about what is true. Therefore, I must remain willing to discover that I am wrong. That is not weakness. That is intellectual humility. And perhaps beneath his noodly appendages, it is also an act of faith. Because faith that cannot survive a question is not much of a faith. And an identity that cannot survive examination is not much of a self. So perhaps now we can take up our Sacred Colander one final time. We have strained our excuses through it, our certainties, the judgments of other people, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And what remains? Not certainty, not some purified, authentic essence, not the real you, finally discovered at the bottom of the bowl. What remains is something considerably messier, a human being. situated, fallible, responsible, capable of changing course, capable of admitting error, capable of choosing again, and still becoming. Maybe that is why his noodliness gave us neither a map nor an instruction manual. Perhaps he merely just set the table and invited us to decide what we would bring to it. So when someone tells you who you are, listen. They might know something you don't, but don't hand them the pen. And when that little voice inside you says, "That's just who I am," perhaps reach for the Sacred Colander. Give that thought a good strain and ask instead, is this who I am choosing to become? Noodles come, noodles go, the world turns round, and sauce is where salvation's found. Go forth, me hearties, question honestly, choose deliberately, accept what is true, change what can be changed, take responsibility for what is yours, laugh when certainty becomes too impressed with itself, and never confuse the person you have been with the person you are becoming. Amen.
If you've enjoyed today's sermon, or it has at least given you a hankering for pasta, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with a friend who could use a little more carbohydrate-based philosophical perspective and saucy theological inspiration. New sermons arrive every Friday, God willing, because our monster appreciates a degree of regularity and plenty of leftovers. Until next time, may you be touched by his noodly appendages, sated by his zesty sauce, and cradled in his comfy colander. Fair winds, following seas, and as ever, amen. Aye, aye, and goodbye.